Welcome to the Daily Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Josh Hayes, joined as always by my co-host, Renee Miller. You can find Renee's work at ProFootballFocus.com along with ESPN, RotoWorld, and you can follow her on Twitter at ReneeMiller01. You can also follow me on Twitter at JoshHayesFS. Renee, welcome back to the second shot at our first show for Week 6.
Thanks. Good to be back.
So the bad news is we had to do this show that we already did earlier in the week. But the good news is now that you're at home, we have a second shot at your cat making an appearance on the show. It's a chance for the cat to keep the streak alive. I cashed, I moneyed, and Le'Veon Bell scored at the end of Week 6 to swing me from a pretty big loss into a pretty nice win. And I think it's all because of the cat. So
the cat is sitting right next to me, so we'll see if he gets up on the table.
Yes, let's do it. All right. What's the cat's name? Garfield or?
I have two. This is Ricky Bobby.
Ricky Bobby. It's better than Garfield.
Named by my son.
Oh, love it. Love Ricky Bobby. Ricky Bobby is lucky. Okay.
So he comes across the street, it might be really fast.
Like Ricky Bobby. Okay, I love it. All right, so we're gonna just dive right in this week. We're gonna try to hit the allotted 45 mark for Fantasy Sports Network and all the people who would like to keep this show concise for Week 6. So we're gonna get right into it, but we've got to let you know really quickly that football is in full swing here in Week 6, and it already feels like the playoffs. Thanks to 1 Week Fantasy at DraftKings.com. With millions being won each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use the promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 Million Fantasy Football Contest. Enter PFF for a free entry now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com. All right, Renee, diving in here to Week 6. Let's go ahead and start up at the top at the quarterback position. Who you got?
Well, I think there's a few different ways that you can go this week. Tom Brady's obviously going to be really popular with good reason. There's all the revenge narratives, the origins of Deflategate and all that. But the fact of the matter is that this team is just firing on all cylinders. Like Tom Brady is playing as good as he's ever played in his life. I think I saw somewhere that he's on pace for a better season than the 2007 season. So it's just use them, buy them, do it. I don't know. You can't really argue against it. Similarly, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, you know what? I was thinking about how I made the case on Tuesday how when I get to this tiebreaker situation between Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, and you get sort of a little bit of a cost savings. So for those of you who want to, plant your flag in the Aaron Rodgers camp, you get a $400 discount on DraftKings. He is at home. We also talked about how San Diego is third worst in defense overall according to PFF grades. So you have all those feathers into your cap. Having said that, I think nobody serves revenge colder than Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. They take that stuff super personal. Just as like a small example, do you remember when I think the backup safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers was filling in for Troy Polamalu or playing alongside Troy Polamalu, and he was talking about how Tom Brady's overrated and he didn't deserve the top billing. And I think Brady punched one in. Either he threw a touchdown or went into the end zone, and he like helmet butted the safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was like right up in his grill. Like, you're gonna talk about me? And it was like almost turned into an end zone fight. And that was just some trash talk during the week. So imagine I think the over-under on this game should be 100. Personally.
80-20.
Yeah. There you go. 80-20. Give Gostkowski an extra field goal. It'll probably be 83-20. So I'm in there on Tom Brady. I don't think there's just any way that I can possibly fade him. He'll be my top cash play. And I'm going to actually, because I think he's going to be so heavily owned, there's your strong GPP play for the second or third consecutive week, rather. Aaron Rodgers is going to be just so far fewer owned. I think we're hovering around like 8 to 9% with him in GPPs last week, which means for a fine pivot into your GPP contest. Will you be taking a similar approach?
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice, because Rodgers also has a great matchup at home, heavy favorites in a high scoring game that could be, I think, a little bit closer than expected.
Okay. So outside of 1A and 1B or 1 and 2, where in that middle tier can we go at the quarterback position for some GPP action that makes some sense for week 6?
Yeah. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going back to Carson Palmer and Andy Dalton. I talked about these guys a little bit on Sirius this morning with Mike Clay and Jeff Ratcliffe, and Mike thinks the bubble's about to burst. I don't. I think that these guys are both priced so efficiently, especially on DraftKings, that they don't have to do the astronomical things that they've been doing in order to meet value. But in the case of Dalton, a lot of people will be off of him because he's facing Buffalo. But despite having 2 of the top 5 cornerbacks, Buffalo allows, I think, the 5th or 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks so far this season. So I'm not really scared off of the matchup there. I don't think Buffalo's offense is going to be able to control the clock in this game. I think Dalton's going to get plenty of opportunities. So he's 5,700.
Yeah.
He was 1.5% owned last year. He's the number 1 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, I think somebody in the DraftKings pricing department took a vacation.
Andy Dalton.
Yeah, he was like, all right, A, B, Blake Bortles. I'm going to stop at Bortles. And we'll just resume in week 7. So carry on with whatever price that you've got. I've got for week 6 on Andy Dalton. Yeah, we also talked about the EJ Manuel experience being in full effect for week 6 and how he's an absolute turnover machine. So that obviously that makes a ton of sense for the Cincinnati defense. And as a corollary factor, hopefully that provides more possessions, maybe in the red zone for Andy Dalton for some cheap touchdowns in short fields. And I think this could be a blowout game. Yeah. So I'm definitely in Andy Dalton. I haven't had enough shares of the Ginger Gladiator through the first 5 weeks of the season. And I'm getting on board. Right. I might be the last guy, on the bandwagon that's starting to sort of weigh it down a little bit, but at least I'm getting on. I got on at some point. So I'm this week for sure. Andy Dalton, AJ Green stacked together. Are we good there?
Yep. Okay.
So now the next question is, are any scenarios where you're rolling Tyler Eifert also into a similar lineup or a different GPP lineup? Can we take a look at anybody else? Outside of that Bengals offense, and how you have that constructed in your GPPs?
Yeah, I'm not on Eifert especially. I think he's going to be kind of an up and down guy, and he could certainly have a decent day this week. I think if I'm looking to anyone else in the offense, it might be Gio Bernard. I think the role that he plays on the offense could be pretty well suited to what Buffalo is not quite as good at. So I kind of like Gio Bernard a little bit more than Eifert if I'm going with a third Bengal.
All right. So if you take a look at what's happening with Tyler Eifert too, his price has risen pretty steadily here overall from 3,500 in week 1 all the way up to I think now 4,900 this week on DraftKings. So you're starting to get into that same spot where it's costing you more to trust and lead play. And he has been up and down. He's had 2 monster games and then 1 okay game in week 2 against San Diego. And then I don't know if he was
0, right?
Yeah, he took 3 targets for nothing against Baltimore, and then 3 for 69, which is fine, but not you expected a little bit more for 4,600. We'll press pause on tight ends because we have a lot to talk about in that spot there. I just want to cover all the bases here from a quarterback position. Andy Dalton is probably your best or one of your cheapest mid-tier options. We talked about how Carson Palmer, number 1 overall quarterback ranking on PFF, Andy Dalton 2. Who else in this value shopping tier can we make a case for in week 6?
I think you can make a really strong case for Ryan Fitzpatrick this week. He's 5,000 and he's he's home against the Redskins, which we know is a hard team to run on. So I think they'll emphasize the pass game a little bit. Fitzpatrick's been really good. He's operated in a really tight fantasy range where he's had not an astronomical ceiling, but a pretty high floor. And for someone in this price range, that's unique. So I think you beat the Redskins through the air. I don't think their secondary is too much to be concerned about. They're coming off the bye. Decker should be a little more healthy. Brandon Marshall has been phenomenal. This is a situation that I will definitely have some exposure to.
Yeah, and tying into that aspect there, Brandon Marshall, I believe, with the number 2 overall cornerback matchup according to Mike Clay's cornerback wide receiver chart on Pro Football Focus. So make sure you check that out. So I'm all over Marshall. I like Fitzpatrick as a DPP contrarian differentiation play as well. In that same vein, I think I'll probably maybe have a few shares of Eric Decker. Taking a look at the Washington defense overall, I believe they're in the bottom 10 in pass coverage. Yes, bottom 10 grade. It looks like -9 through the first 5 week seasons in pass coverage. So that's definitely the route you want to go. Having said that, too, I don't mind Chris Ivory for 5,100. I think we talked about him a bit on Tuesday. So we'll get to the running backs here in just a few moments. Any other home run potential options? Really quickly before you give any other potential plays, I just want to quickly say that I am off Josh McCown this week. And speaking as a Browns fan, I hope he sets another record, but it is a terrible matchup overall. No Joe Hayden this week, banged up in the secondary. Tashawn Gibson missed last week. I believe he's also questionable. Scott Solomon, who was supposed to be their sneaky pass rush specialist / defensive end, who's supposed to help, in both facets in the run game and pass game, just went out for the season on IR. So it just doesn't look good overall. I know that Peyton Manning is still dealing with more of a water gun than a cannon as far as, offensive potential in his arm. But from a defense perspective, even if they lose to DeMarcus Ware, Shane Ray has stepped up with sacks in 2 consecutive games, filling in his absence. So it's almost like they got next to no drop off from a pass rush perspective.
The league in sacks and takeaways. So I'm not going near any Cleveland player this week.
Yeah, you might want to go next to a Cleveland player if you're using Denver as the defense. But you see your guy sacking.
I love Denver as a defense.
Right, exactly. You can take the other side for sure. I will take the other side, and I'll hate it, but at least I'll profit from, watching my team suffer. So that's the way I'm going to approach it. So home run plays. Are we down there with Fitzpatrick? Is that as far as you're able to go?
I actually feel pretty comfortable with Fitzpatrick. I mean, I could see making a cash game lineup that had Fitzpatrick in it. The home run quarterbacks that I see this week are Teddy Bridgewater and Colin Kaepernick. They're both really, really inexpensive. They're both really, really inconsistent. But they both, in their last games, showed us kind of what they're capable of. And Minnesota has faced some tough defensive opponents and dealt with a lot of injuries. And I think it's still a young team figuring things out. There was some nice chemistry between Bridgewater and Stephon Diggs in their last game. They were on bye last week, but I think that could be a promising combination in your home run sense for GP.
Yeah, I like Colin Kaepernick the best out of that group overall. He has 7 rushing attempts in, let's see here, I think 4 out of 5 contests. Last week against the Giants is the first time he didn't at least get 7 rushing attempts in there. And it doesn't sound like a ton, but when you factor that in with 200 X yards passing with 2 touchdowns and the potential for him to score himself with that many rushing attempts in the end zone too. It's actually been, I think, a more productive dual threat combo than Russell Wilson this year. So who I was big on for season long leagues, and I've used a couple times in a few stacks to no avail on DraftKings throughout the season. It's so if I had to choose between the two for this week, or probably at least for the next few weeks, I'm gonna go with Colin Kaepernick. The other thing too with the Niners defense is you expect them to be down, and whether or not how like you said, boom or bust certainly with Colin Kaepernick, but you're paying $5,000, so you don't need nearly as much from your quarterback position to pay off the price tag. Exactly. So, all right, running back position here. Who's some top cash game and GPP options for you?
The top running back for me this week is Adrian Peterson. I just talked about Minnesota in the pass game, but really this offense revolves around Peterson, and he's probably got the best combination of talent and opportunity of anyone going, and that's kind of a lethal weapon. So I think he's worth paying for. It's not outrageous. 7,600 at DraftKings this week. Forte, I think, is a nice pivot. A lot of people apparently still think Detroit has a great run defense, but they haven't been. It's been, to me, like night and day from last season. So I am fine with using Matt Forte, and I say him as a GPP candidate just because I think his ownership always seems a little bit low to me, and I do think Detroit still has this perception of being a good rushing defense. Yeah,
they graded out pretty well last season, 2014, but they've been middle of the pack according to Pro Football Focus, through the first 5 weeks of the season too. And, they've also been burned from a pass coverage perspective, which Forte. Basically, I feel like he's like the number 3 wide receiver or the slot guy right now with the amount of injuries that they've had. In that same vein, too, Marcus Wilson is going to be one of my cheaper guys that I just sort of plugged. Benny Ricciardi and I plugged on the RotoWire DFS podcast that I just recorded 30 minutes ago. So I'll have some shares of him as well. But I love the play for Matt Forte. Now, as far as Adrian Peterson goes, flipping back to that play, I think it's going to be sort of site dependent to me. I just maybe not necessarily want to pay the $8,900 price tag on FanDuel, but I'm much more interested in paying $7,600 on DraftKings versus $8,500 for Le'Veon Bell. In that spot, I feel like you're probably a good bet for similar production. I think it's a better matchup for Adrian Peterson at Kansas City without having looked at the numbers yet. But the cost savings is so significant. I'll probably have many more shares of Adrian Peterson on DraftKings than FanDuel. So slipping over to some outside the top running back options here, who in this mix of the, I guess, 5-6K, a low 7K range on FanDuel makes the most sense for you?
There's a couple guys that you would want to use in there that I don't love this week, the Lacy and Ivory types. You said you're still in on Ivory. I'm probably not. I'm probably going a little cheaper just because I think they're going to emphasize the pass game, and the Redskins are, if not last, one of the bottom 3 defenses in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs.
Just flipping back to Lacy, since you mentioned him, I just want to quickly state my stance on this. I've seen, a lot of people who have said, okay, this is the week for Lacy, great matchup. And, he hasn't necessarily busted out just yet. To me, he is, he's on the outside looking in for me. He's going to have to show me. I want to see it for this week. I think that what you're seeing with Eddie Lacy in terms of what the Packers offense is doing this year is they're just going to book him for about 15 touches. And it's sort of like a Joseph Adai situation now with Peyton Manning back in the day, where Peyton Manning, and it's the same thing with Aaron Rodgers, has such an edge in the passing game that they're fine with a 60-40 split. And James Starks is going to get his handful of touches there as well. So I just don't see them needing to get Eddie Lacy more than, into the 20 touch range, unless it's a blowout. And if it's a blowout, then he probably doesn't play in the fourth quarter, and there's more James Starks than Eddie Lacy action. So you've seen, we talked about the great matchups that Aaron Rodgers has with James Jones, who I believe has the number 1 cornerback matchup according to PFF, and Mike Clay. And I believe Chris Collinsworth mentioned Ty Montgomery as a play that he really likes in his article. There's just great matchups all across the board. We didn't even mention Randall Cobb and Richard Rodgers, who have been productive and target monsters in the red zone for them as well. So to me, you could place Eddie Lacy anywhere from 3rd to 5th fiddle in this offense. So I'm going to be personally off of him. I understand how people feel about the matchup, but I don't want to. If you talk about some value options, I would much rather pay, I think, what is it, $5,800 for Dion Lewis here in week 6 than pay the $6,300 that we have to pay for Eddie Lacy in week 6. Am I wrong here?
No, you're exactly right. I would have said the same thing. That's why I said there's a couple guys in that range that you would think are attractive names, but that I don't want any part of this week. So,
okay,
right there with you.
All right, so sliding into that cheaper range, and we're starting to get into the Chris Ivory neighborhood. Somebody that's going to be mentioned in my Pro Football Focus article coming in tomorrow here as a little bit of a forgotten man, Ronnie Hillman at 4,600 against Cleveland. I think he's set up primed to make me cry on Sunday, but also make me some cash. Your thoughts?
I hope so. I don't know. Denver's offense is hard to predict. It's they should be running the ball more. They should be running the ball more effectively. That's not happening. I see Hillman as a very much a should be play.
Okay. Cleveland Browns, 32nd overall grade through the first 5 weeks of the season, according to Pro Football Focus. There are 3 defenses who are orange. Okay, that's not a good thing on Pro Football Focus in the premium section. They're the one with the biggest negative orange number. So I'm targeting them. The only person who hasn't gone completely nuts against them was Melvin Gordon, and you saw that Phillip Rivers was shredding them, and they had 3 starters missing from the offensive line, so they never were going to be committed to the run game to begin with in that aspect. So that's an outlier to me. You see Latavius Murray go for a 150 ball. Chris Ivory and Bilal Powell I combined for over 150 yards and I think 2 touchdowns. Who else am I missing in the running back Hall of Fame for the first 5 weeks of the season? Justin Forsett, who everybody was left for dead. All of a sudden, what do you know? He faces Cleveland. He's back in the 100-yard category for a week 5. So I will have a fair amount of shares of Ronnie Hillman, and he doesn't even have to get it done necessarily in the run game. He can be a passing factor. The Cleveland Browns have serious issues defending the edge and plays that stretch to the outside, particularly screen passes and long sweeps, bubble screens. And that fits in perfectly with what they could potentially do with Ronnie Hillman. So I think he's going to be a killer in week 6, especially on FanDuel for 4,600. In that same, I think we sort of had this debate yesterday too. It's like you said you are Tuesday. You can play CJ Anderson as well for 4,500 if you like to play, or if you feel for some reason that he makes more sense than Ronnie Hillman. For me, I want Hillman, but
I think Hillman makes more sense, but the fact is maybe they haven't faced anybody so egregiously bad as Cleveland yet, but it's not like Denver has gone up against the best run defenses in the league. They've had plenty of opportunities to run the ball more and to run the ball more effectively, and these guys just aren't doing it. So that's my only concern there is
how ineffective they've been against mediocre competition.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I get it. It should be a great play.
Okay. So you're
don't believe it 100%.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to have 100% exposure, but probably something in the 30 to 50% range. There is some like Amir Abdullah opportunity, I guess, for Ronnie Hillman. Like, should be a great play. They need him. He's the guy now, and it just hasn't necessarily worked out. So, it's duly noted. I will taper expectations slightly.
Oh, that's just me. Speaking of Detroit, though, I mean, I think there's 3 interesting PPR guys, Shane Vereen, Theo Riddick, and Danny Woodhead that are keep popping up in my lineups on both sites, actually. They're all pretty affordable. They're all pretty involved in the passing game. They've kind of all established a role. They all have reasonably good matchups, high-scoring games, and they're all cheaper than, maybe not Ronnie Hillman, but Thomas Rawls or Frank Gore or TJ Yeldon or somebody like that.
Yeah, speaking of Thomas Rawls, so I will have no shares of Marshawn Lynch here. There's just way too much coach speak going on from Pete Carroll and talking about how Marshawn Lynch is a game time decision, even though he hasn't practiced all week, and he finally looks good this week. And then what do you know? So Thomas Rawls is a surprise starter active against Cincinnati. And so I don't feel great about it. And and he hasn't been good when he's been in the lineup. That's a terrible offensive line against a good Carolina D. And Luke Kuechly, to me, is the best middle linebacker in the game. So that's also bad news for anybody in that backfield, Thomas Rawls or Marshawn Lynch. So that's going to be probably an across-the-board fade for me. Now, sneaking into some of these, potential running back subs like Thomas Rawls that I'd be much more interested in, Buck Allen, if he ends up playing over Justin Forsett, which we need that information first. I think Justin Forsett is still expected to play, but missed practice Wednesday, so that is of note. Denard Robinson looks like he might also play if TJ Yeldon doesn't get over this groin issue, so that's something else to monitor. So let me ask you this. Let's say that we get to Sunday, and we know
that not mentioning Sharkhandrick West.
This is what I was going to get to. I was going to give you an A, B, or C. Do you want Sharkhandrick West for 4K, Buck Allen, I think, who's 4,300 on DraftKings, or Denard Robinson at men's salary?
No.
No, she's like, I unregistered my lineup.
No, I'm not going with any of them. I'm just not. There's Ryan Matthews at 3,500. There's Theo Riddick at 3,300. There's I don't know, just as guys that have proven their role on their team and shown me what they can do on the field in good matchups, like I just said, that I would prefer to use. I don't need to be the first person to have Sharkhendrick West fantasy points in my DFS lineup. And I am not convinced that no matter what anybody says, nobody has seen enough of this guy to show that he's going to carry the ball 30 times and look just like Jamal Charles doing it.
See, that's the thing that I also, and I'm just going to give away my entire article on the show. Sharkhendrick West to me is a punt play, but you also can make a case for playing Niall Davis, can make a case for even playing DeAnthony Thomas. Just, if you're in that sort of mood and you're gambling, you're scratching a lottery ticket at that position, because it could be any of those guys, like you said. So I think Sharkhendrick West is probably the best of those three options, and he's still fairly affordable at 4K on DraftKings. But buyer beware in that spot, and I don't feel as good about it than I would as Denard Robinson, for example, who Toby Gerhart or anybody else is zero threat to his touches on a significant level if TJ Yeldon is out of that lineup. Having said that, Houston, I believe, has a top 10 defensive run grade. So if you
and Denard Robinson is a terrible running back. We've seen him have the lead role. Yeah.
I don't like him necessarily for the rushing yards, more for, screen passes out of the backfield, full PPR on DraftKings, maybe paying off a minimum. You only need 12 points to feel good about a 3K price tag, and then everything else after that is gravy. So, if you want to leave me out on the island on Denard Robinson,
I'll take the under.
Okay, she takes the under instantly. All right, fine, done. All right, I think we sufficiently covered everybody who could potentially touch a ball out of the backfield in the running back position. Now let's talk about some wide receivers. Who you got this week?
Well, just to follow up on some of the quarterbacks that we already talked about, I think you're in good shape with Brandon Marshall, Julian Edelman, Larry Fitzgerald, AJ Green. These would be my top receiving options. No Antonio Brown with Michael Vick, no Odell Beckham with a clean MRI on his hamstring, but a hamstring strain nonetheless, that might have him in and out of the game if he does play. So yeah, those are my three top guys. I don't mind going down to Decker. He's over $2,000 less than Brandon Marshall, and I think he's got just as much 2-touchdown upside as Marshall for a lot less money.
Okay. My next question to you here is Jameson Crowder for $3,600 against the Jets. Love the price. Don't necessarily love the matchup. I think he might draw Buster Screen. If I am correct, I would have to check the cornerback chart to be sure. Is that enough of a decent spot for you to be interested, or are you worried about the Jets as a defensive matchup?
I'm worried about the Jets as a defensive matchup. I was all in on Jamison Crowder last week. I wrote him up a few times. I'm sure we talked about him. And I don't know that it's 100% clear that Deshaun Jackson is missing the game. Is that known? I haven't seen anything today.
I haven't either.
If Deshaun Jackson is out again, I think Crowder is an okay play, but there's other guys that are that cheap that I like better, that have better matchups. So,
all right. And the cornerback wide receiver matchup backs up your call on Jamison Crowder there. Buster Screen has a -2 grade, but it's just overall rated in the middle of the pack on the chart. You have to slide almost more than a third of the way down before you find Jamison Crowder. And so basically they're telling you that Mike Clay's trying to tell you he likes about 30 something more plays over Jamison Crowder. And there's a ton of value built into those options at a similar price point. Any other people here in the mid pack? Oh, well, let me just quickly wrap up your top cover guys or wide receiver players. Everybody in the group that you mentioned, the AJ Greens, the Brandon Marshalls, the DeAndre Hopkins, those guys in tier, are they all paired with their QB in every scenario?
No.
Okay, who is not?
What do you mean? I'm staring at a lineup right now where I have Carson Palmer as the quarterback, and it's got Julian Edelman and Larry Fitzgerald in receiver positions. Pairing, stacking, those correlations are fine and they exist, but they're not hard and fast rules. You don't have to do it. And good receivers are going to score fantasy points even if their quarterback isn't in your lineup. So on a PPR site especially, get those high target, high reception guys in and target touchdowns from your quarterback. Especially in offenses like like New England, where, it would be hard to predict between Edelman and Gronkowski who's going to have more touchdowns. That Edelman is still going to have those receptions. So with or without Tom Brady in your lineup, there's value.
All right. I like that mention overall. Having said that, I'm going to have a share of Brian Chips Ahoyer to DeAndre Hopkins in one of my GPPs. It's probably not going to be a Millie Maker lineup. It'll be one of those, $3 or $5 whatever entries. But I just want, that the, I believe he's like 20 more targets than any other wide receiver in the NFL right now. And some of that's a little bit biased because you've had guys like Brandon Marshall and Julian Edelman, Gronkowski and the rest all go out on bye through through week 5. But he's an absolute monster. So if he derives any value, it's all coming from Brian Hoyer for the most part. I don't think you're going to see him run an end around for 80 yards. I mean, it's possible. But so I will have a share, which is sort of, I think, counterintuitive to what we talked about in terms of not having to have him, because it's been so much suboptimal quarterback play from Houston that you're not necessarily great about it. He could turn around. Hoyer can turn around and have 3 interceptions and sort of negate any big play options or plays itself that have happened to DeAndre Hopkins. So I want one stack, but I also
have a great day.
Right. I'm going to mix him in with some of the other options. So I don't have no problem with pairing him as the wide receiver 2 with Carson Palmer and some of the other options. Yeah. AJ Green to Dalton. Yeah. Ginger Gladiator to Green. I'm doing that. I'm actually going to go for James Jones because I love the stats and I believe all the information from Mike Clay. So I'm actually going to have Cobb. I'm sorry, Rodgers to James Jones. I prefer that over Cobb. Agree or disagree?
I have like one of those dog cone shields on against James Jones. Like I just can't, it's cognitive dissonance. Put him, and now he's their top option. I can't get over it.
Okay.
So no, Cobb still for me.
All right. Fair enough. Well, I mean, if you feel great about the matchup, you might as well make 2 separate lineups or whatever. Pair one with Cobb and pair with Jones and cover all the bases. Yep. And if you feel super strong about it, James Jones is affordable to have him in there as one of your wide receiver options in the same lineup there as well. I haven't had as much success. I experimented with that more this week than last. I went, with Eli Manning, Randall, Beckham, Edelman, Gronk, Brady in some of those spots. And I feel like I probably could have just derived better value by looking for a more optimal play in some of these GPPs rather than having 3-man stacks. Are you in favor or less in favor of 3-man stacks in general for your GPPs?
I'm less in favor. I rarely do it. I think we talked about this last week or the week before. Yeah, you rarely. I hardly ever.
Okay, fair enough. And just flipping back to the Odell Beckham Jr. Situation, if Ruben Randall is out, and I believe if I'm correct, Odell Beckham's going to draw. Oh, Nolan Carroll. Okay, that's less enticing than Byron Maxwell. So I wonder if that's going to. So if Ruben Randall sits, then Gary Harris is going to be. Gary Harris. Gary Harris. Yeah, I did that for a second consecutive show. Gary Harris is a shooting guard for the Denver Nuggets, who I happen to like this year. So either Harris, whichever
that's
sport
you're
bonus
playing. Advice right there.
Right, there you go, some deep fantasy advice. If you find a Harris in either sport, he's pretty good this week. So there's that. But yeah, so Dwayne Harris is interesting to me, matched up against Brian Maxwell, who he's been just set on fire multiple weeks. I think last week was the first week where he didn't absolutely get destroyed from a fantasy perspective in his wide receiver matchup. But overall, those are some of the targets that I'm looking at. Any other bargain basement guys that we can scrape up and feel good about from a GP perspective?
Well, Harris is one that found his way into my article from this morning over on Roto World, my FanDuel Bargain Bins article. The other real deep guy that I already mentioned is Stephon Diggs from the Vikings. So I like him to expand the role that he kind of started building before the bye week. He had 10 targets, 6 catches, 87 yards in their last game.
All right. Now the next question that I have for you is, if Alshon Jeffrey plays, does that make Marquez Wilson a fade for you in week 6? That's an important question.
Yes.
Okay. I feel like you can maybe potentially still play him because he's so cheap, and the Bears are facing the Lions. So I still don't feel terribly bad about it. It's 4K on 4K in DraftKings is just value. So in that same sort of, I guess maybe I need to just change my own narrative when sort of defending these cheap guys, because I'm like, oh, you don't need that many points to pay off the price tag, but that's really not what you're going for with these shape options. You want more of an upside ceiling, and it's probably going to get capped by Alshon Jeffrey if he gets into the lineup. So if you actually want to make some money in your GPPs, you're going to need to hit some of these home runs and some of these cheap guys. And Alshon Jeffrey is somebody who goes against that. So,
but if he's out, yeah, all the Wilson again.
Right. If he's out, I love him. And the other thing too is I tried to make a case for any other player that on the Bears, because I'm just looking to sort of capitalize on as much Detroit Lions hot mess as possible. But you really don't feel great about Josh Bellamy. You don't feel great about Meredith, who is in there. Up until an hour ago, Meredith was like a former co-host on The View to me. I didn't even know who Meredith was. So that's not somebody I'm probably going to be interested in. So I think it's going to just come down to Bennett, Marcus Wilson, and Matt Forte, and I'll leave it at that. And then if Alshon Jeffrey plays, then I won't play Jeffrey personally, because I put him in that same, coming off the injury, Arian Foster bin, where you need to go through a full game and show performance before I roll him in there. Do you have a similar approach?
Yep.
Okay, fair enough. I think we
have pulled again. I mean, these soft tissue injuries, you could get pulled again anytime. With a small tweak, they're not going to risk it.
Right. AKA LaShawn McCoy trying to play through a hammy that she never should have been in the lineup in the first place. And now look at him. It's week 6. This guy's done next to nothing. So,
yep.
Tight end position now here. We will leave our obligatory Rob Gronkowski is good and play him anywhere you like commentary, or we can leave it at that. Is that fine with you?
That's fine with me.
All right, and now let's go ahead and flip into the, I guess, tier 2, and tell me who you like this week.
Well, I think Gates is the obvious guy. They were unable to up his price since he played on Monday night, so he's still really cheap. He looked awesome on Monday night, and I don't think 9 catches, 92 yards, and 2 touchdowns is a weekly guarantee, but he looked really strong. He had the same chemistry he's had with Phillip Rivers for the last 10 years. And it's going to be, kind of a shootout, I think. I think San Diego's going to have to throw the ball, and Gates is the reliable target right now, with the San Diego receivers kind of not on the field at best. So I think you have to take advantage of Gates on both sides. He's way underpriced.
What I need to know is who is managing I think the same guy who's managing the pricing on Andy Dalton has fallen asleep at the wheel at Jimmy Graham. Seriously, 5,400 for Jimmy Graham for this level of production. And then you have Gary Barnidge, who I think we talked about him, Mr. Thigh Master over here, making it rain from a DFS perspective, 25 points or more in 2 of the last 3 games. And he almost cracked the 20-point mark with 6 for 75 and a touch against San Diego. And that guy's sitting at 4,400, and Jimmy Graham somehow against Carolina this week. I mean, obviously they did, dock him price-wise after a monster 6-point performance against the Bengals, but he's still only 5,400. He doesn't belong anywhere near the 5K range in my mind. So there's a fade for you there. But am I wrong here? This Jimmy Graham should be 4K right now. Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah, totally.
So there you have it.
Delaney Walker level, Charles Clay level. That's
not a top 10 tight end. Yeah. Wow. I mean, I don't want to be too harsh, but he's approaching Vernon Davis territory quite fast.
Wow, that's
pretty disrespectful. I apologize, Jimmy.
That's the worst thing I could have come up with.
You're not that bad, but you are killing me in my season-long league. So I have a serious level of venom for Jimmy Graham right now, and Russell Wilson. All right, so in this middle tier here, we got Larry Donnell, who is a Kmart Blue Light Special right now at 2,800. Now, granted, he's only cracked double-digit points the first 2 weeks, and he salvaged both of those with a touchdown. So he looks like he's red zone dependent. Is there any reason to be
his MO going back to last year?
So Is he too much of a wild card for you to trust, even at that punt play price?
I think so. Even in this good game, this good matchup with not a lot of other options, I don't see his usage going up enough. Yeah, I think it shifts more to Shane Vereen, if anywhere.
Okay, fair enough. Now, if we're not playing Antonio Gates, or we're trying to just create some differentiation in our tight end lineups after using Gronk and Gates, who else can we make a case for?
I've made a case for Julius Thomas this week. We saw him come back unexpectedly last Sunday morning. He was, I think he played on about half of the snaps. He played mainly on passing downs. He ran routes more than he was asked to pass block or run block. And he caught both of the targets that came his way. So I think it made sense for the Jaguars to get him on the field, to ease him in, to not ask too much of him. But I think that this is a player they traded for so that they could use him. And I know we made the same argument about Jimmy Graham, but putting that aside, let's say the Jaguars are smarter.
Right. Well, the difference is we haven't been burned for 6 weeks by Jimmy Graham the way we have with Julius Thomas. And like you said, just getting started here with 2 targets for 20 yards. I actually think that maybe this Blake Bortles injury, and this might be just me reading too much of the tea leaves, may actually be good for the routes that Julius Thomas runs, middle of the field, less down the seam, more across the middle, so to sort of be that safety valve and have him do a sort of Antonio Gates impression, Phillip Rivers light, and hit him across the field. So for 4K, he's super value at that price for me. If you can't get up to Gates at 4,600, you should be able to in most spots. Now, some of these other guys too here that have been consistently hanging around the top tier in terms of price, like Travis Kelce and Martellus Bennett. I feel fine about Martellus Bennett. I feel less fine about Travis Kelce this week. What's your take on these two?
Kelce had, I think, his least efficient week ever, catching only 3 of 6 targets last week. But and he's dealing with some sort of injury that probably isn't too major. But I think, again, it's a should play. They should use Kelce more. Now that Jamal Charles is gone, they should definitely use Kelce more in this passing offense. But I can't make it happen. So he's another one where I would love to use Travis Kelce. He has so much potential. But until I see the team do that, say that, believe that, I can't.
Yeah, and then maybe he gets more of a better game script here with Jamal Charles out of the lineup, and they can shift some targets his way. So that's possible, but I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach there as well. The one thing I am encouraged about from a tight end perspective with Martellus Bennett is second consecutive week he featured double-digit targets as well. He didn't do a ton with it. I guess Jay Cutler had trouble hooking up with him, just 4 for 32, but 13 targets in week 4 and 11 targets in week 5. I think it's probably a better bet with Alshon Jeffrey again out of the lineup. So somebody I'll take a look at there if Jeffrey remains out. But if not, then I think you would probably rather pay $4,600 for Gates than $4,800 for Martellus Bennett in most spots. All right, well, let's put a bow on this here with the defense position for week 6. So I think we have a few options that we feel better about coming this week, or at least for me personally, than I did for last week. I felt like I had a 2 or 3 defense window that I felt super comfortable about, and everybody else was more of a crapshoot. How are you feeling this week with these matchups?
There's a bunch of good ones. We already talked about Denver and their dominance in terms of takeaways and sacks. I also like the Jets a lot. I like the Panthers. I like the Bengals. We also talked about the EJ Manuel experience that the Bengals get to feast on. Those are my top 4.
Okay. I'm 100% with you with Cincinnati. Jets at Washington, I think it lines up well. I'm actually even willing to gamble on New England, which maybe they've performed quite well. And I know that Andrew Luck is coming back, but he is coming off the shoulder injury. The offense has been completely out of sync. The best performance they've ever had, I think, came in a game where he threw 3 interceptions against Tennessee. And then, the second best performance was Matt Hasselbeck. So
they turn the ball over all the time. That dates back to last year. They've been in the top 2 or 3 for turnovers. It's a sneaky way to target a defense is who's playing the Colts.
Right. So I'll have a few shares in New England, and I'm actually interested in the Green Bay defense as well, who I think had a pick 6 account for one of their 3 touchdowns last week. San Diego, Phillip Rivers has shown his ability to, or propensity to turn over the ball on the road as well. Completely different quarterback as opposed to how he's performed at home. I believe under 250 yards in both of his road performances, and well over 300 plus in San Diego. So tale of 2 different teams. I'll be having a few shares of Green Bay D at 3,200 on DraftKings as well. And that is going to wrap it up for today's show. I want to let you know that
that's another sneaky one. Chicago.
Oh yes. I almost forgot about that. Yeah, bargain basement.
4 points and turns the ball over more than any other team in the league right now. So Chicago has looked a little bit better the past 2 weeks than they did the first 2 weeks. They have allowed, I think the differential was they allowed 34 points per game in the first 3 weeks and only 18 points per game in the last 2. So they've been improving, and hopefully they can take advantage of some Matt Stafford mistakes.
Yeah, you know, Jay Cutler, he's been looking good on D. So that's the entire difference. Well, in all reality, I think they've been doing a better job with their drives and ball control on the offensive side versus Jimmy Clausen, which makes a ton of sense and helps out the defense, keeps them off the field. So with you 100%, 2,400, super cheap. You ran out of money, you borrow some from Jay Cutler. All right. Thanks for watching and listening to today's show. Brought to you by DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. Don't forget that you can subscribe to PFF Radio on iTunes, listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio, and watch the official Pro Football Focus YouTube channel, and watch them on the Fantasy Sports Network. Thanks as always to Renee Miller for joining me and for her expert insight. Don't forget to follow her on Twitter at ReneeMiller01. And you can also send all your comments and complaints and questions to me on Twitter at JoshHayesFS. Thanks for tuning once again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Good luck this week.